Galveston is a one-take trip to this beautiful, charming beach town. But what you may not know is beneath the sand here, you'll find roots of rich, deep American history with very special Texas ties. But this is not just about black people or freed slaves. It's not just about Juneteenth being a federal holiday now. This is about Mother Freedom and all of her heroes, some of whom you're about to meet today. It's also about the generations that were changed by what happened here, June 19, 1865. Galveston is where it all began. So for the next 30 minutes, we invite you on the journey to Juneteenth. From our backyard in North Texas, down the 300-plus mile trek to the coastal bend, Juneteenth history has a storied connection to DFW, and our story begins in 1863. Freedom's Eve, as it's called, the day President Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. 2 years later, General Robert E. Lee surrenders, ending the Civil War in Virginia. It took 2 months for the news to reach Galveston. Union General Gordon Granger reads General Order No. 3, freeing all enslaved people. Texas was the last state in the Confederacy to do so. Later that year, the 13th Amendment is ratified and slavery is abolished in the United States of America. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So we're here at the first stop on the Galveston Freedom Walk. This is at Pier 21. This marker, the Middle Passage marker, commemorates the enslaved people being transported to this port. Galveston was the largest slave port west of New Orleans. Of the documented over 15,000 enslaved people to come into the Texas ports, Galveston had over 11,500, according to research by Rice University and the Slave Voyages Project. So from here at the Middle Passage marker, we'll move over to the second stop, which is at the southwest corner of 22nd and Strand, to the Juneteenth marker. At this location, we have the Texas Historical Commission marker that recognizes that Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation September 22nd, 1862. So this corner is one of the most historic corners in Galveston in America, because this is where the Union forces got off the ships, came downtown, set up their headquarters, and issued General Order No. 3, announcing all enslaved people of Texas are free. And I can just imagine what the heat would have been like in 1865 as the soldiers moved from location to location, the third stop being the United States Custom House. Now, it was the Battle of Galveston on January 1st, 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was supposed to go into effect. Now, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation only applied to states in rebellion, which would have included Texas, but the Confederate Army took back control of the island when they won the Battle of Galveston, therefore delaying enforcement of this Emancipation Proclamation until Gordon Granger arrived on June 19th and issued General Orders No. 3. So we're going to the fourth stop, the Colored Church on Broadway. As you move through the city during the Freedom Walk, you're retracing the steps of the ancestors and those that lived in these spaces before us. In 1865, I imagine the soldiers walking through the city, headed to the Colored Church on Broadway, which today is Reedy Chapel Church. 17 years before freedom came to the enslaved people of Texas, they actually worshiped outdoors in this location until 1863. So I imagine in 1865, when the soldiers came and posted notice on the door at this location, how jubilant and celebratory that event would have been to finally get the news that what you prayed for has finally arrived. Freedom has finally come to Galveston on June 19th, 1865. So we're here at the fifth and final stop on the Freedom Walk, where legend has it that Gordon Granger stood on this balcony announcing that the enslaved people are free. But this location has significance for other reasons, because late Representative Al Edwards introduced House Bill 1016 in 1979, making Texas the first state to officially recognize Juneteenth. So this is the Galveston Freedom Walk, and we invite everyone to come to Galveston to retrace the steps of those that came here before us as you move through the city past these historical structures and locations.
Everything you didn't read in your history books about Juneteenth, it lives here in this 3-room permanent museum in Galveston. But it's not just a regurgitation of Juneteenth facts. This is really an experience that walks you through the life of enslaved people here in Galveston. I mean, to the point where you can get to read and hear from them in their own voices. Something that Tommy Boudreau tells me wasn't always the case.
This is personal for me. Juneteenth represents how far we've come and also how much more work we need to do.
Like the waves of protests rushing into cities after George Floyd's murder, Tommy Boudreau says the calls to Galveston came flooding in.
We were getting calls, texts, emails, and everything from all throughout the United States and abroad. What is Juneteenth?
Miss Tommy, as I came to know her, says she and the African American Heritage Committee knew it was time to curate a Juneteenth museum.
So much of the information has been incorrect.
Information, she says, like the myth that Granger Gordon read General Order No. 3 at the now historic Ashton Villa. Miss Tommy says, no ma'am.
We identified the carriage of Ashton Villa as a place that we could at least start and try to tell that story, because in growing up, I knew little about Juneteenth. Nothing. There wasn't anything in our textbooks.
That lack of learning from Miss Tommy, a retired Texas educator who knows a little bit about everything, inspired the dedication now to this work. She was a college student when she learned about Juneteenth's origin story, but always celebrated, she says, with her mom when she was younger.
I did not know the significance of Galveston. It is United States history. I mean, it's part of our history. And you know, sometimes we have to recognize the good, bad, and the ugly. And this was a dark time for the United States, and I know it was. So let me just show you the exhibit. Much of it is interactive.
Now Miss Tommy keeps busy with her best friend writing books about Galveston and its place in history, hoping the turning of each page ignites the same passion she has for others.
In Texas, our order has 2 words that's very important: absolute equality.
In Fort Worth, work is underway to build a national Juneteenth museum at the corner of Rosedale and Evans. In addition to this museum, the campus will be home to a business incubator, a food hall, a 250-seat theater, and an event space. Construction will start later this year and is expected to open in 2025. The journey to Juneteenth continues after this. Coming up next, more from Galveston, Texas, where it all began. Less than 500 feet from this historic church started by slaves, you'll find Central High School. It was the first black high school in the state of Texas, and historians tell me it produced more than 50,000 graduates before it was forced to close. They also tell me that black students came from all across the state here to receive one of the best educations available to them at the time.
Central taught everything. Even in my day, we had swimming pool, industrial arts, wood shop, auto mechanics, commercial cooking, sewing.
Central High School changed its address over the years, but its purpose remains steadfast: educate black students.
This building that we're in is the remnants of the first 12th grade public high school for blacks in the state of Texas.
Central's doors swung open to 125 students in 1885. It was integrated in 1968.
It's important to preserve so people can actually know their history, the great things that came through, and a sense of independence that we had when there was segregation.
Great things and great people, like Dr. Clyde Owen Jackson. Jackson graduated from Central in 1949, later matriculating to Tuskegee University, an HBCU in Alabama. He was a successful journalist, community activist, composer, author, and second lieutenant in the military. He even became the first black postmaster of Galveston in 1978.
Central represents a time when black people had an entrepreneurial spirit because they had to. We had our own restaurants, our own businesses, our own financial organizations, our own entertainers.
Today, Just 3 Black-owned restaurants remain on the island, a drastic drop from the 20 that once welcomed Black patrons. But it was Central's curriculum that attracted students from across the state, even luring college professors from their rural HBCU campuses to the big city of Galveston.
We went from a place in 1865 when we were not supposed to be reading to a place 7 years later that you've already got colleges established in Texas.
In fact, Mr. O'Neill even says the original Southwestern Athletic Conference was all Black and all Texas.
You had Paul Quinn, Bishop, Wiley, Houston, before it was Houston-Tillotson, Prairie View, all these in the 1800s.
Central was competitive in Prairie View's Interscholastic League, founded in 1920, because they were not permitted to join the University of Texas Interscholastic League. Despite that, Central continued to lead in academics, sports, and the arts. Central was the pinnacle point that spread the word for Juneteenth through the education and through the knowledge of students who came here and left and people who stayed here and taught. Outside the old Central Cultural Center is a park named in honor of the 1903 Negro heavyweight champion John Arthur Jack Johnson. They also called him the Galveston Giant. 5 years later, he became the first African-American world heavyweight champion. The Galveston native went on to hold that title for the next 7 years. He started boxing as a child after he was bullied in school. Johnson died in a car accident in 1946.
We are the beacon light.
Ever heard the saying, "I had a praying grandmother"? Well, those faith-filled cultural anecdotes emphasize the cruciality of the Black church to the Black community.
We have to remember that it was 5 slaves that started this church back in 1840. So she was been able to stand long before we even came to existence.
Standing proud on sacred soil, sustaining hurricanes, tropical storms, and a pandemic, Avenue L Baptist Church has been a historic staple in Galveston for 183 years.
This church is the first, so we are a representation of a beginning. It started here. Juneteenth started here. Black church started here, especially in this state.
For more than 400 years, the Black church has parented and positioned the Black community for safety and success, often a guiding light through the shadows of our nation's dark history.
The Black church has always been instrumental in the Black community. In the Black church is where we had information.
Sometimes it's a campaign stop for politicians, but for lifelong members like Kanisha Adams, Mission L has always just been home.
There's nothing like coming home to church and wanting to still help here and be able to grow here and be able to learn in order to keep the oldest Black Baptist church history alive.
The church was officially deeded over to its members after the Civil War, with the historical marker following in 1981.
Slowly growing, slowly evolving more.
It's a spiritual comfort for Pastor Johnson, who says the church is a symbol.
It's always been a beacon of hope for the Black community, and I think it is still that to this day.
A beacon of hope, a safe haven, a war room, a community classroom during turbulent times of civil rights and Reconstruction. But for Black Texans, it was all birthed in Galveston at this church, even nurturing moments that led to freedom.
Juneteenth means to me a new sense of freedom, a freedom that we were already free, but we got the notice late. And so this day is just a day that we can come and celebrate together our freedom. And as a Black man, it's very important, even though free is not really free.
The grandmother of Juneteenth observed the holiday by hosting her Walk of Freedom event in Fort Worth. Opal Lee and her supporters joined her on a 2.5-mile walk, representing the 2.5 years it took for slaves to learn they were finally free. So why is she known as the grandmother of Juneteenth? In 2016, at 89 years young, she set out to raise awareness for the holiday by holding walking events at Juneteenth celebrations across the nation. She also started a petition, and in 2017, delivered more than 1 million signatures to Congress. On June 17, 2021, President Joe Biden signed a bill to recognize Juneteenth as a federal holiday. We can't forget about the man considered the father of Juneteenth, Al Edwards. The native Houstonian and Texas state representative helped establish Juneteenth as a Texas state holiday, which was first observed in 1980. While Texas led the charge in recognizing Juneteenth, it's also leading the charge for conservative states passing the Crown Act. Governor Greg Abbott signed the bill, which prohibits race-based hair discrimination, into law on May 29th. One of the Crown Act movement founders, Orlena Nuwaka Blanchard, spoke to the underlying theme that Juneteenth shares with the Crown Act.
The correlation is both are a celebration of freedom, and it provides people of African origin in this country an acknowledgement of who they are naturally in the world and their value in this society.
Blanchard says the Lone Star State passing the Crown Act sends a big message to the other states that have yet to do so. Absolute equality. It's not something that just looks good on this 5,000 square foot mural. It was the exact language used in General Order Number 3, freeing the enslaved people here in Galveston. And when artist Reginald Adams got the chance to commission this piece, he took it personally.
It felt like this was the work of the ancestors, and I was just playing a part in carrying their story and their hard work into the future through a tool that has been such a personal means for me, and that's through public art. We start the mural with Africans before Columbus being discoverers coming from West Africa. The Juneteenth mural project really was birthed out of the Absolute Equality mural that we painted in Galveston, Texas, the birthplace of Juneteenth. In 2021, Juneteenth became a national holiday, and I saw an opportunity to take this message of freedom, emancipation, beyond the shores of Galveston, across the country. We wanted to represent really the pain, the sorrow, the tragedy that accompanied over millions of Africans losing their life as they migrated from West Africa onto the Americas. In the last 2 years, we've now painted 10 murals in 8 different cities: Houston, Dallas, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Shreveport, and Miami, Florida. And then that moves us into this phase where 1862, President Lincoln announces the Emancipation Proclamation, and all slaves were free, but obviously that didn't happen in Texas. It took the Civil War. And I'm just really excited to see this idea of freedom and emancipation spread across the country through the arts, which would include soldiers fighting for their freedom. It's the opportunity to really do what I love, but also celebrate what happens when you're free, what is possible when you have freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And then that moves us into that really pivotal moment in Galveston, Texas in June 1865, where Major Gordon Granger arrives in Galveston from the port of New Orleans with literally thousands of Black Union soldiers to do 2 things: announce General Order Number 3, which proclaimed that all Texans would deserve absolute equality to rights, which freed more than 250,000 enslaved Blacks in Texas, and seeing how important it is that we celebrate each other despite our differences. We first have State Late Representative Mr. Al Edwards, who was the legislator that really was the brains and mind behind Texas becoming the first state to recognize Juneteenth officially, and now celebrating Juneteenth through murals. So this has been a dream come true to live out my passion my entire life. And then we have Miss Sheila Jackson Lee, who is our congressional representative, who is one of the signatures on Juneteenth becoming a federal holiday.
I'm Steve Pickett, inside the South Dallas Cultural Center in South Dallas Fair Park, where the celebration of Juneteenth and its recognition is highly recognized here as well. Along the corridors and alleyways of Dallas's Deep Ellum, muralists leave their mark. For artist J.D. Moore, he leaves an impression, a history map of sorts, as a nod to the day known as Juneteenth.
I am telling Dallas's role in the legacy of Juneteenth, and specifically South Dallas and Fair Park.
Moore melds his skill as a muralist and matches and molds the story of Dallas beyond the days of Granger's Galveston announcement of freedom for all enslaved people. For example, the African American Museum at Fair Park, the park's grand esplanade that still banned Black presence decades beyond Lincoln's proclamation of freedom.
To this figure here, which is a figure that was depicted in a relief medallion adorned over the Hall of Negro Life.
Moore's Juneteenth mural reminds and remembers through a Dallas prism.
But Dallas has this rich history that is, quite frankly, hidden, and it is, very impactful to the legacy of Juneteenth, originating as a Texas holiday and then just sort of blossoming into a whole national recognition.
JD's work, of course, is inside the South Dallas Cultural Center here in the Fair Park neighborhood. It provides a wide array of artistry dedicated to life in Blackness. And it's not just for Juneteenth. The Cultural Center made a space for Mr. Moore.
Starting with present day, this is kind of how I recognize the holiday as a sort of a jubilee or a celebration.
And with it, he shared Texas history with the images of Dallas history for the nation's nod to Juneteenth history. In South Dallas Fair Park, Steve Pickett, CBS News, Texas.
In time for Juneteenth, Texas Health Arlington honored Margaret Taylor, the first black nurse in the city of Arlington. She graduated from Arlington Memorial's nursing program in 1957, where she worked at the hospital for more than 45 years before retiring in 2013.
More from Galveston, Texas, the birthplace of Juneteenth, when we return.
10 friends spirited by one mission: honor the ancestors.
One of our slogans is, with independence comes great responsibility.
Together, outside of their day jobs, they created Jubilee LLC and a Texas-based premium vodka, GO3. It's named in honor of General Order No. 3, which freed the last slaves in Texas.
It was unique. So it actually started before there was actually a national holiday. This was in the planning, in the works for about 3 years. It was important for us, being a Texas-based vodka, to have a story that tied us back to the history of the state of Texas.
The vodka recipe itself pays homage.
One of the staples was yams, in that time in the 1800s, and of course, so we knew we wanted to have something unique that would represent what our ancestors, what they harvested, what they grew, and so knowing that we could do a sweet potato blend in there, it was just inspiring to us that we can kind of put a part of our ancestry and history into the brand.
With each sip savored and cent spent, the legacy continues through scholarships.
We're giving 8.65% of our net proceeds to help build the legacy at HBCUs, to continue our pathway. We're all graduates at HBCU, our team, and so we want to just keep that legacy going.
An homage to a holiday to be enjoyed by everyone.
We truly hope you've learned something here today or been inspired to learn more about Juneteenth. Again, it's American history. In the words of our beloved Opal Lee, nobody is free until we all are. I'm Nicole Baker, and thank you for taking the journey to Juneteenth.